Okay, the next report that I'm going to have Mary Ann pull up is the staffing report. And this is something that I started with the Board of Education in my first year when we were dealing with the $2 million deficit and how to staff our classes and how to work on an operating budget that was within our operating revenues. And so the first part of the presentation will just be Kristen touching on actual course enrollments. You'll see a number for a March enrollment. That's when we started to schedule students and we finalized all the course signups that students did, and then where we are in October. The reason that number 20 is used is one of the things that the board and I put in place 7 years ago or 6 years ago was, in order for a course to run, we said they had to have a minimum of 20 students enrolled. Otherwise, it needed board approval. And so that was one of the for the new board members. That was one of the first ways we went through. When I first became superintendent, was looking at, we had several classes that had under 20 students. And so when you're paying a full-time teacher, and there were some classes with 10 students, 8 students. So we created it that those classes may still need to run, but they should have board approval. The board should be aware of where those classes are, that they're just not any random class that wanted to run could run. And so that's what the significance is the 20 that Kristen will highlight in her first few charts. Other than that, you'll see talk about caps. And I'll cover that a little more in my when I get to the back of the presentation. But more or less what we tried to do over the last 4 years as our financial stability improved was looking at class sizes in core classes, which are like your math, your science, your English, and we use our social studies here. So our core classes. And in those, we try to keep a 25-to-1 average, but you never can do this perfectly, so I always put plus or minus 2. The teachers will tell you it's a lot closer to 27-to-1, but we do have some classes that have 23-to-1, because sometimes when you have 100 kids signed up and you have to do 3 or 4 sections of a class, one might have 28, one might have 22, the numbers will vary. So that's the cap. So our core classes are 27-to-1 as a max. Our elective courses are 30-to-1, plus or minus 2. So that's anywhere from 28 to 32. And then we do the same thing with our PE classes and our band classes. Their cap is 40-to-1, plus or minus 2. And so those are marching band, choir classes, and our physical education classes that are not in the pool or in a classroom setting like health. All right, Kristen, why don't you do the first part?
Okay. So the first chart is looking at the courses that had board approval back in March to run that were under 20 at the time. And so you can see, what that enrollment was when we sectioned for that, and then where they're at right now. So that's the October enrollment. So you can see some courses stayed about the same, some increase. You can see pre-algebra this year, we had a big increase. So we had obviously about 10 students transfer in that were below benchmark and needed some additional support with pre-algebra. And then we had a little bit of drop off in German 2 and AP Spanish literature.
Actually, all these are better than last. We had some significant drops in several classes last year, and most of these are either up or a very small drop.
Well,
must have channeled people a little different or better this year. Huh?
Yeah, and the more often we do this, we can look at past trends to see,
Sure.
Okay, we section at this number, but we typically have 5 students drop between, now and when the school year starts.
Right.
So the more data we have to look at, as well as transfer data, the more accurate we are at predicting, but there also could be any given year where there's a fluke as well. So the next chart is looking at classes that are only offered one period a day. So we only have one section of, for example, business principles and accounting. That course is only offered once a day, so we only have initially 24 students that were interested. And then you can see where our current enrollment is. So as you go down the chart, many of the courses increased or decreased by 1 or 2. Obviously the big thing that's notable is debate. And the challenge with these can often be if 2 of these courses run at the same time, students have to make a choice. And so what happened is there was some conflicts with debate, and so some students had to make a choice. And then we also had 1 or 2 students change their mind as well. And so we always do our best to avoid that. But certain things like honors madrigals and debate, typically students will choose honors madrigals because they had to audition for that. And so that students will have to go through that process.
But it's
And
the
then-
same thing on this chart. You must have worked a little harder on putting these classes where there's only 1, so they weren't during the same period, because you had
Yes.
much less of a drop-off overall.
Yeah, Beth Augustine worked really hard on that, and you can use the computer to see, how many conflicts you're at, and then try to reduce that before finalizing things. So yes,
Very
Beth
good.
worked very hard on that. And then lastly, the last chart is courses that are only offered 1 period a day that are over our cap. And so that's honors, wind ensemble, and marching band. It started at 46 and it's now at 49. But part of that is if you look in the other chart, there was a marching band class that was below the cap. And so part of that is auditioning and putting kids at the appropriate level. So you may always have a class that's a little higher and a class that's a little lower depending on the ability levels of the students.
So how is,
Go on,
if this is still appropriate to ask, how is the music department doing here in terms of enrollments? Stabilized?
Thanks for coming, ladies.
Yeah, I believe
Yes.
so. I don't have the specific data in front of me, but I know that, Aubrey Prince, who was here earlier, has done a great job of not only in Fine Arts Survey, but also in her choir classes, and we've seen numbers start to go up with that as well. And I think, her excitement that she brings to the musical certainly helps, along with the efforts with the feeder schools too.
So when we brought back the musical, we did say that we wanted to try and pick musicals and plays that offered lots of parts. Are we still trying to do that?
Mm-hmm. Last year, Aubrey, for the first time since I've been here that I know of, double casted the musical, and she's planning on doing that again this year. So by doing that, you offer more students lead roles, and all she did was add 1 performance, and so then that way all the leads have an opportunity to perform on 2 nights. So yes, certainly. And then last year with Annie too, she also included an opportunity for all of our feeder schools that were, I believe, in grades 5 through 8 to come and participate in the opening number as well, to hopefully then gauge interest when they come to high school.
Any other questions for Kristen?
You want me to go to the
Next page. We have 1 more chart to go through.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So the next page is a kind of a summary of the FTE by department last year, this year, and you can see the change. And then also, if you look to the right of that, you can see the class averages for each department. And some departments have classes that fall into each cap, and some only have 40 to 1 classes or 25 to 1 classes. So you can see what all of those averages are. And then if you look on the bottom right, the overall class average of core classes this year is 25.41. And Wes had asked a question about the 5-year average. I only have the 3-year historical, and so last year that number was 25.8. And the year before that, it was 26.21. So that number has continued to go down. The core, the average core class size has continued to go down in the past 3 years.
Kristen, just like Scott's going to update the rental chart, can you maybe put a little chart on the bottom that has historical core class average? Is that what you want to correct, Wes?
Right,
Mr.
yeah.
Smithing? So maybe we could just put the overall class average for core classes, historical, so then they can see it instead of just trying to go off of memory what you said or trying to write it down real quick. If you actually, an easier way to do it is just update your chart, and when Mary Ann posts the packet, then board members can refer back to that. Okay. And the other thing to point out on this chart is the yellow highlighted section. So when we talked at budget time, when we were approving the budget, we said we had about a .7 unused. We were waiting to see what transfers came in at. So we only had to use a .1 of that. So we're still sitting at, or actually we haven't used any of it. So we have a .7 roughly in the budget that we haven't used yet, which should help with that deficit a little bit. The transfers didn't come in as strong as we thought. Any questions on this?
I don't know if I should clarify now, but on this chart, as you look at the required FTE under special education, on this chart, social workers fall underneath that. And on the chart, you'll see a little bit later, we separate out social workers.
Okay.
So moving forward, we can certainly separate them on this chart as well, to clarify.
Okay, so the next chart that you'll see is our feeder school enrollment numbers. And these are as of September 30th, 2017. So I know there was one question submitted, can we get the this year's numbers? That's actually, these are this year's number.
Okay.
So what we do is Mary Ann sends out this chart to all the schools that are listed above. On the chart, they fill it out, and then we compile some of the following charts you're going to see. So we just show this to you to kind of see what's being reported from the feeder districts that maybe come from the communities that you support or that you live in. If you go to the next page, these are our projections. And so Scott, why don't you cover this page on how you come up with your projections?
Okay, using the feeder school chart just before this, what I do is I take 90% of what the feeder enrollment is to get what I believe the projection is going to be for that incoming class. The current classes that we have in the school, we use 1% is added for movement with transfers. So it's kind of like on a diagonal effect. So if you look, it'll be 90% of whatever the 8th grade enrollment is. And then if you go on a diagonal, it will be 1% increase from what we have currently enrolled. And basically I just take that and project it out as far as I can to try to get an accurate projection using the feeder school enrollment on this to potentially see what we got coming for next school year.
And you can see from where, going back to 16, our projection to actual, we've had some, the last 3 years, I mean, in 16, so fiscal year 16, remember, is, how's that? That's 1450, correct? The school year?
15, 16.
15, 16. So you can see where we projected 1605, we had 1633. We projected 1632, we came in at 1636, we were only off by 4 students. Last year we projected 1645. For this chart, it's 1637. And then next year we're predicting 1642. Now, if you look at the bottom where it has our enrollment, the actual, meaning 619 in-house, is because then we have 18 students outplaced. And I'll go over how I kind of do that projection on the next page. So there was one question submitted on, the number of right now, they don't line up with like the 1637 to 1640. So for consistency purposes, we could pick one date and pull that enrollment. So I know Tim had submitted a question about, well, on this chart it says we're sitting at 1637, and then on the next chart it says our current enrollment is 1640. So I do that chart a week later or 2 weeks later, so I have the registrar pull the numbers. If we have 1 or 2 kids leave or 1 or 2 kids enroll, that's where the offset is. So we found exactly where the 2 or 3 kids are. But so if the board wants for consistency purpose, we could set this on. We pull the numbers for that date, but it does somewhat change. It does fluctuate. So that was what was causing the inconsistency. There was also one question submitted about a projection for in-house for next year. I have that on the next page, and I'll go through how I look at that. Mary Ann, if you could pull, if there's no questions, I'd like to go to the next page, unless somebody has any questions. So, real quick, Scott's projecting a 1642 for next year. When I pulled these numbers on I did this chart last Wednesday, Kristen, when we did this last Tuesday. So we were at 1640. So we're projecting that we're going to stay pretty flat for next year. And so what you'll see tonight is the staffing recommendation next year that I don't think we need to increase any staffing. And remember, we still have that 0.7 available. So let me run through this a little bit. It can be kind of cumbersome. The board members that have been with me for the last 7 years recognize this report, and it's really helped us get our hands on some things, and it's really worked. So let me just walk through it. And I probably need to tighten up some of the headers here a little bit to make it a little more user-friendly, but Scott and I talked about doing that for next year. I put Scott's name on this report so that he understands. I'll be shifting this to Scott. But, okay, so up in the right-hand side, you'll see a box. A 1.0 full-time equivalent or full-time employee here is 5 classes. So a traditional teacher is full-time when they teach 5 classes. The other definition, it's shortened just so everything fits on one page. It's abbreviated for required FTE. Now, these are people that are carry Illinois teacher certificates, Illinois licenses, but aren't necessarily in full-time aren't teaching 5 classes, but are paid on a full-time equivalency. So that's like your social workers, your guidance counselors, instructional coach release periods, other things that are contractual, special education teachers, librarians. So those are your required FTE. We swing to the chart on the left where it says 1718 budgeted FTE. So in the budget this year, we have a budget of 104.3. Our current FTE that's being accounted for salary dollars in our budget is 103.6. Of that, we have 25.2 certified staff members that are what I would call required teachers, that aren't in 5 classrooms but are required. We have to cover their cost, okay? So counselors, there's 5. Social workers, there's 2. Special ed, there's 13.2. Instructional coach release period. So we're paying that instructional coach as a full-time teacher, but remember, they get 1 extra release period. So we have 7 of them, so 0.2 times 7 comes out to be 1.4. So we basically hire an additional 1.4 staff to cover those release periods of the instructional coaches. Librarians, we have 1. ELL is a 0.6, so that's English as a second language. That fluctuates a little bit like special ed each year, but we've been consistent around 0.6. Credit recovery, that's a certified teacher we have dedicated to just help our fifth-year seniors or our students that are lacking in credits, that they cover the Apex lab, and those students come in and do classes online, and then we have to have a certified teacher in there because there's some grading involved. Literacy coaches, this is an intervention that we started 2 years ago, I believe, maybe 3. Literacy coaches are teachers that they're paid as full-time teachers, but portion of their schedule is where they're working in other regular ed classrooms teaching reading. So they might have maybe 3 English classes, and then 2 of their classes are in, they're able to go to different classrooms and work with the students on reading strategies, or pull kids out and test reading, or work on reading strategies with the teacher. So that needs to be accounted for. The dean's office, we have 1 teacher who teaches 4 classes, and then a 0.2 of her schedule is to come and help with dean's coverage. That's our female dean's assistant or assistant dean. And then instructional tech. So like our instructional tech, she has a 0.2 where she's in an English classroom. The remainder of her schedule is teaching teachers how to use the one-to-one and apps, initiatives, going into classrooms, teaching technology, working with students on the technology. So we have about 25.2 required FTE. If you go to the chart now on the top.
Can you ask a question before you go there?
Sure.
You highlight the 3 for 2819 that are either changed or you're uncertain of, like special ed and ELL, English as second language. That could vary depending upon, more than anything else, transfer students or new students either. But the actual number difference between the current 25.2 and 25.6 is the .4 social worker, right?
Right, and I'll get into that in a
And
second.
before, the other one is, there's certified nurse. We don't show anything this year, and we show 0 for next year. I thought we had a certified nurse.
Oh, we do, but she doesn't, I need to pull that off the 2019. We have a certified nurse. We have a registered nurse.
Right.
If a person is an actual certified school nurse with the school Illinois license, they have to be paid on your teacher's certificate.
Okay.
So we have a registered nurse that has the ability to work in school and man our nurse's office.
Okay.
And we pay there under the, we have a part in our collective bargaining agreement, so that person is paid under the non-certified employees.
Okay.
So that's why it's a 0 there.
I got it.
We remember, the reason it's showed up on that chart is when Ms. Jackson was no longer with us, we didn't know if we were hiring a certified school nurse or a registered nurse.
Got it.
We actually had some cost savings by going the registered nurse route. Okay, so let's go to the top of the color charts. So current enrollment is 1640. I corrected it, so we have approximately 22 students that will be in either credit recovery, outplaced, homeschooled. So the other place that talked on the other chart when it said in-house, the numbers don't match. The reason they don't match is this accounts for the kids that are homeschooled or credit recovery, and maybe take one class here or part of that .2 for the 50 or seniors or kids that need to make up credits. So approximately 1.2%. So we have 1618 is what I use for in green. So then I look up the number of students that are taking 5 classes, the number of students that are taking 6 classes, and the number of students that are taking 7 classes. You multiply, the chart makes basically it's the classes times the students comes out with the number of seats or seats filled. And then what I try to do is divide, get a class average of 27, because we try to get our core classes, which are a majority of our classes, at 25-1 plus or minus 2. So I use 27 as a class average, and this will give you, okay, you need 3.3 teachers, full-time teachers, to cover the class, all the kids that take 5 classes. You need 25.9 teachers to cover all the kids that take 6 classes, and you need 48.9 teachers to cover all the kids that take 7 classes. So when you add those 3 up with the 25.2 that were from the chart on the left, it says we should have approximately 103.4 FTE. If you look at our current staffing, we're at 103.6. So only went 0.2 over what our projection should be. And so what I'm showing you now in option A and option B, next year, if this projected enrollment comes in as is, with 1642, and historically it's been about 1.25% are outplaced, homeschooled, or credit recovery. So that would give us roughly 1621. If we go with our consistent trends, we'd have the 32 students in 5 classes, 632 in 6 classes, and 957 in 7 classes. So
Why do we think the number for 5 classes is going to drop by 2/3 for next year?
it's the historical data shows that 60% of our students enrolled take 7 classes.
That one I understand, but I'm asking.
So
about
then
the
it goes,
5.
there's a percentage for each of these. I don't have the chart up in front of me.
Okay.
So if you,
The percent wouldn't, the 5 classes, wouldn't swing that much, right?
right, I'll check it again, but I'm pretty certain. And Kristen, you have the Excel there to see what the percentage is. But if you look at what our staffing is,
I mean, the number of students for next year is nearly identical to this year, right?
right,
So it just seems odd that we think.
only
the number of-
32.
Well, it's a 2/3 drop in the number of students who are going to take 5 courses. Unless maybe this year was an
If you look-
anomaly where it came up higher. or something.
Because I think if you look at the 632, we're only at 583 in the
Right.
chart above.
All right.
So that's where you see more with 6. A traditional student is assigned 6 classes in 1 study hall.
Right.
60% of our kids take 7.
Right. Okay, well,
So if we look at this roughly, the only change is the 25.6. I'm still saying we staff close to 27.1. We're at 27.03 as our current average right now. The only change that I'm showing in an increase in staffing is if you look at social workers, we have 2.0 right now. We need to still make some strides in addressing some of our students that are having issues that are non-special ed students. We do deal with a lot of students that have some personal issues, some family issues, where our social workers, between the amount of minutes they need to cover with, being just the required social work minutes that come out of the IEPs that we're mandated to do, and then all of a sudden a kid will come in that's having a terrible experience at home that day, or something's going on in their personal life, or they're suicidal, or have some other disorder. Our social workers are starting to get spread a little thin. So we have talked about, we're going through some numbers right now where we're having one of our administrative assistants pull, the same list of schools that we compare ourselves to, how many social workers they have, how many do they dedicate to special ed, how many do they dedicate to regular ed, just to see where we're at. So that's the only, if you look at that chart on the left for required, the only increase I'm saying that I'm proposing right now is that 0.4 at part-time social worker. I highlight always special ed and ELL because if we get a huge influx of second language learners, we're mandated to have to provide those courses. That could always increase. And the same with special ed. If our IEPs increase significantly with incoming freshmen or transfers, there may be a need to increase special ed.
Or the action, you don't even have to have a huge increase in IEPs if the needs are certain significant needs you need. You could have a one-on-one situation or something.
Right. So I think we should be fine being able to use the 1.43, 1.42 that we budgeted this year for next year, even with that increase of social workers.
I think it'd be helpful if we have one more fact. Wes asked you to give you the history on the overall class of size of core classes, which you indicate has gone down in the last 3 years.
Correct.
So 4 years ago, you started a program where you were going to start with the freshman class and reduce the class size for the core classes, right?
Yes.
And we went through now all 4 years as of this year, right?
So there's no need to add teachers. We added 2 to 3 teachers each year to try to address those needs.
Okay.
So we're at a point where all our core classes, Kristen, am I correct, are at 27 to 1?
Math, English, science, and some
Social-
social studies.
Right.
So are we also, the seniors that have, was it study hall, either first or the last period, are they allowed to, come in late or go home to kind of ease some of the class?
Students who have a 7th period study hall as seniors are allowed early dismissal.
Okay.
We don't allow, right now, students to have a late arrival. That late arrival in the past, we have done, I believe, but prior to my arrival, and what was happening was then students were taking it upon themselves to be even later in their late arrival. So when they had a first period study hall, they would show up sometime during second period.
But
I had swimmers,
Start of
they
second.
really liked the late arrival because they could go home and shower and come back, so.
But with respect to this report, neither of those affect the head count for the staff, right? Because
No, that-
you
I
have to
think
go to
the
a
reason-
study hall that.
The
there's
issue would
already
be like the
some-
Yeah,
5
it's a
classes,
non-cert.
like where that comes up, if a senior has 2 study halls and one happens to be 7th hour, then they would have a study hall in their day and they still have early dismissal.
I think Laura's asking that question because prior to my arrival, there was a push with the administration to eliminate late arrival and early release.
No, I think that's a good program to have, but I'm also asking because if you have a significant number of students, especially senior year, who take advantage of early, being able to leave an hour early for jobs or whatever, that could free up some FTEs.
Right, so I wasn't done.
Yeah.
When you brought that up and when we changed it back to allow late arrival, the elimination of that late arrival was forcing kids to either take a study hall And so most of those kids are like, well, I'm not going to sit in a study hall. I might as well take a class. And so that drives up your FTE count for classes that they maybe necessarily weren't going to take. And there was two schools of thought. Kids taking other academic classes is better than kids leaving early, right? But then there's also the school of thought of if a kid needs to leave early to work or to take care of a family member or pick up a younger sibling or other things they have going on in their life. And so we did shift that a couple years ago, and that has helped a little bit.
Okay.
So
We still have a large portion of our students that take 7 classes.
Right.
So what I've tried to do is show the board that we can hang at this 27.1 to 27.4 and remain pretty flat with our staffing budgeted now at 104.3, 104.2.
because the number of students. is
Because the
gonna be
number of
flat
students is
next year.
flat. Okay? If the board comes back in the spring and says they would want to see cuts, then I'd have to try to raise this class size average, and then we'd have to identify where we would be able to try to cut some certified staff, because that's what 80% of your budget is staffing.
Right, and that's why, rather than cut, we want to have the ability for students to self-select, particularly your senior. We have 400 seniors. If every senior said, I'm leaving an hour early to go to work, that would free up quite a bit of FTEs.
Yes,
Hold on a
but
second.
what we
I'm
have that
confused
we
by-
have that in place already, and 400 seniors aren't signing up for it.
They aren't doing it.
But let's make sure, I'm not sure I understand this. So, if somebody has last period, just seniors can leave early, or can anybody leave early?
Seniors.
Okay, so only seniors can leave early, and that frees up, because rather than, they wouldn't have gone to a study hall, they might have taken a course, the majority of them, it sounds like. And in the morning, nobody gets to, if they, first period, nobody gets to come late, they all have to be here for first period, right?
I believe so, yes.
So, because of that, some students, rather than have to come in and sit in a study hall first period, they might take a course.
They could. I don't know how much of an impact it has because it's dependent on where their study hall falls.
Okay.
You could have a study hall, but if it's third period, that's not going to help you one way or another with early release or late arrival.
Okay.
So we could look, if the budget becomes tight, before we say we want to cut
Right.
teachers or raise class sizes. One thing you could tweak is we could look back at allowing students that have first period study hall to come with a late arrival if they're a senior. The other thing would be possibly an early release for juniors and seniors.
Yeah, maybe juniors and seniors, because juniors would be old enough to have jobs
Cars.
Right.
and cars.
So that's something we could look at. I don't think we rush to that till we see where we're at after
Right.
the board said, hey, after the mid-year point, we should be seeing where the budget is and where we're at.
And that's the one thing Mr. Grissom is pretty insistent on, even though he can't be here. He didn't tell me today. Several of the members, including him, were concerned that when we talk about at the end with the budget, can we do a balanced budget, that our biggest expenditure, our hands are tied, because we approved the head count long before we approved the
In March.
budget. So he is expecting some kind of preliminary information about how the head count is going to affect the budget before we approve the head count this year. So, and I'm looking at him, but
I know.
obviously I'm talking to you, I'm sorry.
Right.
So is that something that?
Nope, we're on
gonna be
pace.
able
I
to
mean, if
see?
you looked at
Okay.
Scott's report already, we're finished, Scott's report, financial report for this year is, we're at 33% of the fiscal year.
Uh-huh.
We're at 39, we've used 39% of the budget. Last year at this time, we were at 38% of the budget.
Right.
So, I mean, we're on pace to what we said we're trending. It's not like we've increased
Right.
expenditures, anything out of the ordinary. But before this board would say, let's raise class sizes and let's cut teachers, there's some things we can probably do, simple things like maybe allowing juniors and seniors, now allowing juniors to have early release. So those students that are maybe taking an extra elective or course that they normally wouldn't take, before we start cutting teachers and raising class sizes in core classes, that might be a way that it might help with some of the FTE.
Well, let me ask the board members, I think it'd be helpful to have that information for you to estimate. If we allow juniors to leave early, how would that affect the head count. And if we allowed juniors and seniors to come in after first period, and again, you could say, I don't like the idea, but you're asking for
What if we
it.
started sports the last period of the day?
What's
All
that?
the fall sports.
Say that again?
What if you started the sports in the last period?
They
So-
tried that a few years ago, and I don't think it worked very well, did it, Chris?
But the other issue is, as like we said, we have 60% that still take 7 classes, so what do you do with those kids that have a full schedule? So,
We might drop down to 6 if they're playing.
we don't want to, I don't think we want to sacrifice the integrity of the academic institution. We would want to encourage kids to take 7 classes that want to take 7 classes, right? If those kids want to take 2 APs, we want to make sure we allow that opportunity. All I'm saying to you is, probably, as a former dean, assistant principal, the building administration probably said, hey, we're only going to allow early release, not late arrival, because the school board has an attendance initiative and a tardy initiative, and so you're going to get more tardies at the beginning of the day than you are at the end of the day, right? It's not an attendance issue.
But
And our
again-
ADA does generate revenue for the school district. So when those kids miss 2 periods, now they count for a quarter of an absence. That hurts your ADA, which the state uses as one of the factors in your
It's the only
state aid.
factor that you have control over in your funding.
And when a student only takes 5 classes, an absence in one class has a much bigger impact on your overall ADA because they look at the percent of the day that a student misses, and the number of hours that a student.
Well, this is all useful information, and I think you should include it, but provide the data, the estimate, because, the other flip side of it is we put a lot of programs in place to get people here on time and do it. Again, I'm ignorant of this, but there's ways to make kids come on time second period, probably, maybe not, maybe there are, but I still think they're competing interest. We want the attendance, we want kids to be well educated, but there's also competing interest that if kids are just taking the classes because they have to come in first period, I don't know if that's the best choice.
I think one way to pull this information, Kristen, we should probably pull the historical information of seniors that have taken advantage of the early release. Because if you put it out there now and we do like a survey, you'll get a lot of kids that will sign up and say, yeah, I'd be interested in leaving school early. And then all of a sudden they realize, well, they got to give up marching band because it runs 7th period, and they want to be a madrigal singer and that only runs 6, you know what I mean?
Or first period.
Or they
Right,
play a sport
so the
and they wanna go
conflicts,
home and
the
come back.
conflicts might, but at least if we could see a historical trend from when we started, when we implemented this back, and it was under so it's within the last 5 or 6 years that we implemented back early release. If we can see how that's grown over the last 5 years, we can come up maybe with a trend of, maybe that will mean, basically every class period you want to, a 0.2 FTE is roughly 30 students,
Right.
is the way you should think of it.
Yeah, if a student is only in one sport and they leave early, 2/3 of the year, they can still leave and do as they will. It's only the one time during the sport, maybe they'll go home, change, eat, whatever, and come back. Many of the students, because we're talking about junior and seniors that have cars.
But think about the impact on parking and traffic as well. How many of those juniors and seniors carpool? Because when you carpool, you're more likely to get a permit. Juniors and seniors that have younger siblings who drive their younger
Right.
siblings to school, and now parents who are going to have to get into the traffic.
Well, those are all
to-
factors to consider.
I'm just saying, but it is
There-
something to
factors
consider.
Before we cut programs, I
Yeah.
think we can look at options for people to self-select.
I think this is
Early.
all,
Yeah,
listen,
premature.
this is all the right questions to be asked.
Right.
Because if we can tweak 1 or 2 things without cutting teachers or raising class sizes or do anything, or cut class offerings, that was another thing. When it got really bad with the deficit, one of the things I was proposing to the board is, hey, you got 60% of your kids taking 7 classes. That at some point in time, if we didn't fix our budget, that was something we were going to have to look at. Like, do we allow everybody to take 7 classes, or do we limit it to juniors and seniors? So I think this is all good information
Right.
for the board to be asking, and these are all things we should want to look at, because if there's 1 or 2 things we can do to stay afloat and stay close to a balanced budget, and until we start having some of our retirees and some of our shifts in our salary schedule, shift more to new teachers from more senior teachers. I think that will be a good way to keep the integrity of what we're trying to do here for academics and for the students here. So we can definitely look at that, Kristen. We'll pull that with Beth and see if that's worth looking into more. But the long story, the moral of the story, my story here tonight is, I think even doing exactly what we're doing, we should be able to stay rather flat in staffing because our projections for enrollment are staying rather flat. And so we should be right around 104 teachers next year.
But the thing is,
But we still have a negative budget.
Well, I got another thing that's going to address that, I think, in the levy presentation that I went through with the Finance Council, and I'll touch on that in a minute.
but and the other thing is why it's worthwhile looking at is, the next year you project that enrollment's going to go from 642 to 683. That's going to be a teacher or two. And the next year you're projecting it's going to go to 1703. That's another teacher or two.
Right.
So at time as money gets tight under that, if you're trying to balance the budget, for next year it's going to be easier because our enrollment's expected to be flat. But the following 2 years, we're going to have to deal with less revenue at a time when our enrollment's going up pretty, for our kind of standard, kind of significantly 2 years in a row. So it's better to look at it now. And, again, we listen to everything you tell us, Kristen. I mean, we know there's downsides to that, or you wouldn't do it the way you do. We know you consider all those things, but at the end of the day, the board's got to look at the whole picture. So I think it just would help educate us.
Absolutely. Certainly am cognizant of that. It's also important to keep in mind, too, those years where enrollment goes up, we do have a few teachers that are planning on retiring,
Right.
which hopefully should help offset some costs as well.
Sure.
I have a question. So what does a study hall save in terms of FTEs compared to a regular teacher?
Well, our study hall is supervised. I mean, there's no cap on our study hall. It's in the cafeteria.
It's in the cafeteria,
And it's
okay.
supervised by a non-certified FTE, someone that's on an hourly rate of pay, compared to a teacher that's on a certified rate of pay, and that there's a cap in their classroom.
So study hall is very economical, but as they pointed out, kids don't like study hall that much, so if they have to be in the building, they'd rather take a class than go do their homework in the cafeteria.
Right.
That's what they're telling us is the norm.
Correct. That was the intention of reinstating the early release. Because at the time, the previous administration had a concept that if you didn't have late arrival, early release, those kids had to choose between a study hall and an academic course, and most of our students would choose an academic course, which is a great philosophy.
Yeah.
But when we were running a $2 million deficit, we had to come up with some creative ways that if there were kids, even if it's 10, 20, or 30 that wanted to leave early, we should allow them to leave early instead of taking up a seat in the classroom where...
That's why I go back to the varsity sports, right?
Right.
We just do a junior, senior, you take the varsity, that's what I did, especially I had a sport that was off campus. I think we still have baseballs off campus. It's a process to get there, why X, Y, Z, so maybe that is an option.
And some of our athletes do that. I mean, they'll have a PE waiver, and if it's at the end of the day, I don't know if we allow them to sign out of their study hall. Those are all things we can look into. But I don't think you can make a universal. We'll start varsity sports at 7th period because there are a lot of our varsity athletes. You notice today we recognize so many kids that are academic all conference. Because a lot of our athletes are the students that are taking 2 or 3 AP courses.
The other issue with that
Very true.
too would be our coaches. A lot of our coaches are in-house, and so all of those teachers would have to have 7th period off, which would make scheduling classes very challenging, especially because certain departments are very coach-heavy, and so then it would almost be impossible for certain
You couldn't
departments,
run
like the math
PE last
department.
period of the
PE.
day.
Correct.
I hear the concern. I think the new board members have gotten to know me now, the board members that are returning board members know, I hear two concerns. The two biggest concerns that this board wants me to work on is make sure that budget deficit doesn't increase and find out what we can be doing differently to improve our college readiness and our work with our feeder schools. And that's what we've been working on a regular basis. Our teachers' union is aware of that. They've come to, the executive board of the union has come to me with suggestions on maybe some things we can do in-house with interventions to try to improve college readiness that won't increase staffing or cost. So everybody's, the message is loud and clear, and we all are pulling in the same direction. So, and I think a sign of me saying to you, hey, for next year we're flat. Every year we could remain flat or keep our staffing consistent without increasing. There's some dollars to be saved there. So I'm well aware of the concern, and we're on top of it.
Great, thank you. Thank you,
Well,
Chris.
Some information on that, at least I'd like, and perhaps the board would too, is this percentage of students that are taking 5, 6, 7 classes, how does that compares to other comparable schools?
They
Just-
gathered that
Did they?
information when we looked at it to
'Cause we
consider cutting it down to 6, but maybe you can update it.
Yeah, I don't know if some of this is, I don't know if this though is available on a school website where they would share this,
Yeah,
of how many
we'd have
kids
to-
are taking 5 or how many kids take
I don't
6.
believe so. It would be something we'd have to
No.
ask them if they already have it calculated.
What, does 5 a year for 4 years get you graduated in time?
That's the bare minimum you could
It's
take.
21,
bare
isn't it
minimum.
21?
It's 22,
22.
Okay.
so that would not, I mean, that would be 20.
Oh, okay. So 5 a year for 4 years would
It
not
doesn't
get you
get you.
graduated. Gotcha. You'd have to take 6,
2
at
years.
least 2 of the years.
Right.
Yeah, so,
And many of our students, obviously, you can tell by the data, have a lot more
absolutely.
than that.
Both of my children are in the 7s. Every year of their career here, I think.
I don't think we're at the point where we need to look at that yet, as far as limiting class, how many classes you could take.
Right.
That's when we're talking that budget deficit's gotten to, I mean, we may need to be there in a few years from now, but at that point, I don't think we're even close to that point yet. I think we have to let some things work itself out. I mean, the purpose that we negotiated the contract the way we negotiated is that we have almost 10 teachers within the next 5 years that are retiring, so we'll be able to replace them with new teachers at a different point in the salary allotment. At that time, if you look at our attendance projections going out 3 or 4 years, they start to work their way back towards where we're at right now. Right, so there's a valley here that we need to fight our way through, but it's not an abyss. That's what I would say right now.
I mean, the only thing I'd caution here is I think it's reasonable to have the Plan B or Plan C and to identify the low-hanging fruit, whatever that's going to be, the next low-hanging fruit, which would be maybe juniors.
Yes. And
just
that's what I
have
said,
that
I think they're
plan- have
good
that in
questions, John.
place.
I think
Yeah.
that's a good question, because if allowing juniors and seniors to, or allowing juniors to leave, or possibly doing the late arrival, helps us get through another year without increasing that deficit, or actually helping lower the deficit without really impacting course offerings or class sizes, I think that's a win for the board, right?
And the fact of the matter is, it'd be helpful to know, it might not affect the head count of teachers at all. If 30 kids leave early and they were going to take 20 different courses, it doesn't even
very well-
affect what's
you're absolutely
available.
right.
So
Right.
You're
that's why it's
absolutely
just
right.
helpful to know whether it's something to consider or not.
Are we ready to go on?
Anybody have any additional comments or
Yeah, we're ready to
questions?
go on.
Thanks, Kristen.